At the end of September 2019, in an upscale residential complex in Kunming, Yunnan Province, China, the morning routine was proceeding as usual. By 10 a.m., elderly residents had returned from their early morning market trips with bags full of groceries, while younger residents were busy with their studies and work. The complex was enveloped in its typical tranquil atmosphere until a horrifying sound of an object crashing to the ground shattered the silence. The impact was so violent that it triggered the alarms of numerous parked cars nearby. Curious residents peered out their windows to see what had happened, and the scene before them was shocking. A short-haired woman lay face down on the ground, her body completely mangled from the tremendous impact, blood and brain matter scattered everywhere. Horrified neighbors, stunned into paralysis, frantically called the police. Law enforcement quickly arrived at the scene and cordoned off the area. Through identification by the building's security guard and examination of surveillance footage, they determined that the victim who had fallen to her death was Yang Ping, a resident of apartment 2303 in the adjacent building. She had moved into this upscale 2-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment several years prior. However, when police conducted a search of apartment 2303, they were surprised to discover a middle-aged, thin man with sparse hair inside Yang Ping's apartment, despite her living alone. This man introduced himself as Dao Wenbing, Yang Ping's colleague, and explained that they had just returned to the apartment to retrieve an important document. According to Wenbing's account, as soon as they entered the apartment, Yang Ping complained about the stifling heat inside and suggested going to the balcony to get some fresh air. While trying to lean out to enjoy the cool breeze, she unfortunately lost her balance and fell. Wenbing insisted the incident happened so suddenly that he couldn't react in time and could only helplessly witness Yang Ping's fall from the 23rd floor. However, this explanation seemed forced and unconvincing. Wenbing's eyes revealed confusion and panic that he couldn't conceal, which only increased the investigators' suspicions. Police decided to thoroughly examine the balcony where the tragedy occurred and discovered numerous fingerprints as well as scratch marks on the outer railing. This suggested that the victim may have struggled before falling, completely contradicting Wenbing's story of a sudden accident. The question arose, why couldn't someone standing right beside her provide any assistance? Moreover, the sharp eyes of the investigators also noticed faint scratch marks on Wenbing's exposed collar, marks that appeared to have been made by a woman's long fingernails. With these suspicious details, police decided to take Dao Wenbing to the station for more thorough questioning. Through extensive investigation, police confirmed that Wenbing and victim Yang Ping were indeed colleagues at the Kunming Intermediate People's Court. However, Dao Wenbing held the position of Deputy Director of the Enforcement Bureau, while Yang Ping was Deputy Chief of the Judicial Technology Department. These two departments rarely coordinated in their work, making the reason for returning together to retrieve documents even more suspicious. The residential complex's security camera system had recorded a notable fact. Wenbing frequently visited the building where Yang Ping resided, sometimes appearing several times in a single day, from late night hours to early morning. This suggested that their relationship might extend far beyond ordinary work colleagues. Even more surprising, the financial investigation revealed that Yang Ping's related accounts contained an enormous sum of 40 million yuan, approximately $5.5 million, of unverifiable origin. Simultaneously, a search of Wenbing's private residence not only yielded a large amount of cash, but also uncovered a firearm and hundreds of bullets. Clearly, both were concealing serious secrets. Faced with irrefutable evidence from surveillance cameras, Wenbing was forced to change his testimony. He admitted that he and Yang Ping indeed had a secret romantic relationship. According to his new statement, unable to bear the pressure from this illicit affair, both had made a desperate decision: to commit suicide together by jumping from the building. However, after Yang Ping had resolutely carried out the act, Wenbing hesitated and wavered. Especially after witnessing the horrific scene of Yang Ping's shattered body on the ground, he was so terrified that his hands and feet trembled, unable to take another step toward the balcony's edge. Therefore, in this internal struggle of, if you jump, I'll jump too, he waited until police arrived to investigate the fall. The investigators listening to this story found it increasingly familiar. The scenario of a couple planning to die together, but ultimately only the woman dying while the man cowardly failed to follow through. When analyzing the timeline of their relationship, police discovered that Wenbing had divorced his wife 6 months earlier. If his testimony about having an affair for 4 years before planning suicide was true, this not only proved that Wenbing had been unfaithful during his marriage, but also maintained a romantic relationship with a female colleague. Both behaviors were serious taboos for officials within the system. So why would he willingly risk destroying his future by voluntarily admitting to these shameful scandals? Investigators believed this was likely a lesser of two evils strategy. Wenbing was trying to conceal a much more serious crime, such as murder. After conducting a second meticulous sealing and evidence collection of the scene, police discovered many other suspicious clues. These included scratch marks on the floor left by overturned furniture, glass shards not yet cleaned up in wall corners, and countless scratch marks and scattered hair. All this evidence pointed to one conclusion. Before the fall occurred, the two had engaged in an extremely violent altercation. Neighbors living nearby also provided important additional information. One resident recalled that after returning home from taking their grandchild to school that day, they heard chaotic and noisy sounds coming from apartment 2303. These sounds included furniture crashing, dishes breaking, a woman's screams, and a man's voice that seemed to be deliberately keeping quiet. Only a few minutes after these chaotic sounds occurred, the neighbor heard the terrible sound of Yang Ping hitting the ground. To better understand the mechanics of the incident, police conducted a series of scientific experiments. They used a mannequin with height and weight equivalent to Yang Ping's, then dropped it from the same balcony where the tragedy occurred multiple times. The experiment results showed an important difference. If it were merely pure free fall, the position where the mannequin hit the ground would be significantly closer to the building compared to where Yang Ping's body was actually found. This proved that Yang Ping had certainly been subjected to a strong outward pushing force. Another notable detail from the experiments was that although the mannequin sustained severe impact upon falling, sometimes even shattering into pieces, no experiment recreated a position similar to how Yang Ping was discovered. This further reinforced the conclusion that she had not slipped or fallen due to an accident. Based on all the evidence collected, police reconstructed a more reasonable sequence of events. Wenbing and Yang Ping had erupted in a violent argument right inside the apartment, with the situation escalating from shouting at each other to throwing objects, then from verbal arguments to physical fighting. In his rage, Wenbing realized his opponent was completely unwilling to yield, so he developed the cruel intention to eliminate his lover. However, with a height under 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters, and a rather thin build, when confronting Yang Ping, who was desperately struggling to protect her life, Wenbing had no overwhelming advantage. Therefore, the struggle lasted for some time, from inside the room all the way to the balcony. Finally, Wenbing gained the upper hand. He tightly embraced Yang Ping and pushed her off from the 23rd floor. In that life-or-death moment, Yang Ping desperately tried to cling to the railing, but Wenbing coldly and ruthlessly pushed once more, causing her to ultimately fall to her death. However, facing police, Wenbing still firmly denied the murder charge. He insisted that Yang Ping was the love of his entire life, and if necessary, he would be willing to sacrifice his life for her. So how could he possibly harm her? Faced with Wenbing's stubborn obstinacy, investigators were forced to delve deeper into the motive behind the crime by uncovering the secrets behind Yang Ping. The investigation results revealed a shocking truth. Yang Ping, a woman who appeared dignified and courteous in her role as deputy department chief at the court, was actually the shared mistress of multiple high-ranking officials across all 3 power systems: public security, prosecution, and courts. In this complex network, Wenbing was merely one of many very ordinary and unremarkable lovers. An important clue was discovered when police examined the real estate purchase records of apartment 2303 where the tragedy occurred. Besides Yang Ping's name, another name appeared on the documents: Zhao Ligong. This was particularly noteworthy considering the apartment's value. With an average price of about 19,000 yuan per square meter, approximately $400 per square foot, in this upscale residential complex, the 2-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment Yang Ping was using was worth several million yuan. and notably, the entire amount had been paid in cash. Such enormous financial capability was completely incompatible with the modest salary of 4,000 yuan per month, approximately $550, that Yang Ping received from her court job. This suggested that Zhao Ligong, the apartment's co-owner, was very likely the person behind paying for the entire apartment cost. Li Gong was indeed a figure with considerable influence in the power system. His resume showed an impressive career advancement. From captain of the Comprehensive Criminal Investigation Team of Yunnan Provincial Public Security, then deputy mayor of Kunming City, concurrently serving as public security director, and finally promoted to deputy director of Yunnan Provincial Public Security. However, notably, at this time, Li Gong had been suspended from duty to serve an investigation into corruption charges. Furthermore, his legal wife was not Yang Ping. When piecing together all this information, it wasn't difficult to conclude a familiar pattern: corrupt officials keeping mistresses. And indeed, that was exactly the case. Although Li Gong always appeared serious and righteous when speaking publicly, his private life revealed him to be an insatiable womanizer. As early as his tenure as director of Honghe Public Security in Yunnan Province, Li Gong had been involved in an adultery scandal with a female subordinate. This incident was even recorded on video by the woman's husband as evidence and reported to the Provincial Party Committee Standing Committee. However, thanks to powerful backing forces behind him, this scandal was completely suppressed, having no impact whatsoever on Li Gong's smooth career advancement afterward. Despite causing such a serious scandal, Li Gong never changed his womanizing nature. During a client reception event, when he encountered Yang Ping, then only 18 years old with radiant beauty, he was immediately so captivated that he couldn't look away. From then on, the two began and maintained a mistress relationship lasting over a decade. Thanks to this special relationship, Yang Ping experienced an unbelievable leap forward in her career. From a temporary worker doing menial jobs without even completing vocational high school, she advanced to the position of deputy department chief at the court. Li Gong not only supported her career, but also invested money to buy the upscale apartment, the very site of the tragedy, to serve as their secret love nest. Due to this kept lifestyle, Yang Ping remained single until age 40, while simultaneously becoming Li Gong's capable white glove for transferring dirty money and money laundering. This tight web of interests was precisely why Yang Ping possessed tens of millions in her accounts. However, over many years, Yang Ping was far from the idle woman her appearance suggested. Beyond her long-term romantic relationship with Li Gong, the powerful backer behind her, she also actively built a complex and extensive network of relationships to serve both personal goals and political interests. She maintained extramarital relationships with many men from various social levels. On one hand, there were young, tall, handsome male students fresh out of college or interning at the court, chosen for their attractive appearance and ability to satisfy her physical needs. On the other hand, there were high-ranking officials over 50 who held real power and could provide her with professional privileges, rapid promotions, and substantial financial flows. Li Gong's attitude toward Yang Ping's side activities could simply be described as, he didn't care what she did, as long as it didn't affect him. So, how was Wenbing connected to both of them? According to police investigation files, Wenbing was one of Yang Ping's extramarital lovers. After the two began their relationship, Wenbing immediately became deeply infatuated. He continuously bought designer handbags and expensive jewelry for Yang Ping and even divorced his wife, hoping to marry her officially. However, Yang Ping had no intention of developing this relationship into marriage. In her eyes, their relationship was simply a transaction of, you're an ATM, I'm an elevator. Each person getting what they needed, nothing more, nothing less. However, things became complicated when Wenbing discovered that Yang Ping's former lover was the provincial deputy public security director, Zhao Ligong. His first reaction wasn't jealousy or anger, but a kind of self-deprecating irony. I sleep with Yang Ping. The provincial director also sleeps with Yang Ping, so technically the provincial public security director and I are bedmates, aren't we? From this ridiculous thought, Wenbing immediately used Yang Ping as a bridge to bribe Li Gong, hoping for promotion. For his part, Li Gong wasn't entirely surprised. More than a year earlier, Yang Ping had proactively asked him to support someone who claimed to be her distant cousin, who had worked in the court system for many years without promotion. But with his extensive experience in criminal investigation and politics, Li Gong quickly realized that this so-called distant cousin was simply another of Yang Ping's lovers. If previously Li Gong could pretend not to know about Yang Ping's other romantic relationships, when this thin veil was torn away, he naturally erupted in fury. Sleeping with my woman and then wanting me to grant favors. This was absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, Zhao Ligong applied a strategy of taking money while seeking revenge. Not only did he not promote Wenbing, but he also deliberately played tricks in personnel transfers, moving him from Deputy Chief Judge of the Trial Supervision Court to Deputy Director of the Enforcement Bureau. Although nominally this was a lateral transfer, those familiar with the situation knew that the Enforcement Bureau essentially dealt with subjects who deliberately refused to comply with court judgments. This work not only offered no benefits, but also frequently required dealing with pressure from both ends, being pressured by the court while being opposed by the subjects, truly exhausting and thankless work. What made Wenbing feel even more pressured and frustrated was that when Li Gong was arrested, Yang Ping, who had maintained a mistress relationship with him for many years, was simultaneously drawn into the investigation. This meant that his bribery of Li Gong through Yang Ping as an intermediary would sooner or later be discovered and exposed. Police later recovered a crucial audio recording from Yang Ping's phone that captured the exact heated argument between her and Wenbing. In this recording, Wenbing harshly criticized Yang Ping as useless, not only failing to advance his career through Li Gong, but on the contrary, dragging him into the mire due to Li Gong's downfall. Yang Ping retorted that Wenbing himself lacked talent and blamed her instead, truly unworthy of being called a man. When the argument reached its climax, Yang Ping uttered words of despair. "Now the three of us are like ants on the same rope. If we die, we all die together." With this crucial audio evidence, combined with DNA analysis from blood and skin fragments under Yang Ping's fingernails that completely matched Wenbing, the evidence became rock solid. Wenbing finally had to confess to the entire process of killing Yang Ping. According to Wenbing's confession, initially he genuinely felt despair about his ruined future and broken family, so he had conceived the idea of ending life together with Yang Ping. The two had even embraced and cried in Yang Ping's apartment, swearing to be husband and wife in the next life. However, when the appointed day arrived, both began to have second thoughts. Wenbing felt that sacrificing life over romantic matters was somewhat unworthy, while Yang Ping was secretly harboring her own calculations. With her strongest backer, Li Gong, having fallen, Yang Ping realized she would have difficulty escaping the coming disaster. In this desperate situation, the only path to hope for survival was to voluntarily surrender and perform meritorious service to atone for crimes, and Wenbing had become the first name on the list of people she planned to report. It could be said that this pair of lovers were trying to push each other into the line of fire. It was precisely during this tense argument, when Wenbing discovered that Yang Ping was secretly recording to gather evidence, that his rage exploded. In his fury, he ruthlessly pushed her off the 23rd floor while trying to stage the scene to make it appear like suicide. However, despite having witnessed numerous serious cases throughout his life, when committing the crime himself, Wenbing left traces everywhere and couldn't resist police interrogation for long. But if we turned back time to 2004, Wenbing, whom Yang Ping ridiculed as useless and cowardly, was actually the judge who struck fear into criminals, the person who had personally tried a series of major cases that shocked the entire nation. Dao Wenbing had been a very intelligent child since childhood, always ranking first in academic performance. In 1987, he was admitted to Southwest University of Political Science and Law in Chongqing. While one cannot deny he had some advantages like minority bonus points and lower admission standards in Yunnan in the 1980s, when college entrance exams were extremely competitive with tens of thousands of students competing fiercely, being admitted to such a prestigious university was truly remarkable. Southwest University of Political Science and Law was one of the nation's top key universities. Studying law, a highly sought-after major at the time, showed that Dao Wenbing was truly an outstanding young talent from the countryside. According to a 2020 Sina article, a reporter interviewed one of Wenbing's classmates. This person recalled that although not very tall, Wenbing was very handsome and physically fit. He was not only good at soccer, but also played guitar, sang well, spoke charmingly and humorously, and was an idol admired by many in school. Thanks to this natural charisma, at a joint university dance party, Dao Wenbing experienced love at first sight with a beautiful girl from Sichuan Foreign Language Institute. The two quickly fell into a passionate and intense romance. After graduation, this girl decided to follow Wenbing to Yunnan, and soon after they married, becoming a beautiful story of student love with a happy ending. Wenbing succeeded in both love and career. In that era, college graduates were assigned jobs by the state. Thanks to excellent academic performance and graduation from a prestigious university with a highly regarded major, Wenbing was assigned to work at the Kunming Intermediate People's Court. Wenbing's former classmate recalled that there were 23 Yunnan students who graduated from the law university that year, but only 4 were accepted into the intermediate court. Among them, Wenbing was the only one without any family background or connections, relying entirely on personal ability to be selected. After beginning work at the intermediate court, Wenbing demonstrated a diligent work ethic and solid professional competence. Most importantly, he had a spirit of despising social evils, as if born to be a judge. With these qualities, Wenbing steadily advanced and achieved the position of deputy chief judge. By 1998, Dao Wenbing faced his greatest challenge when assigned to handle the case of Sun Xiaoguo, a notorious underworld boss in Kunming. Thanks to his family's influence in the judicial system, he had repeatedly escaped punishment despite serious crimes. In 1998, after an assault and sexual assault case that outraged public opinion, many people still believed Xiaoguo would again perform an act and be released. But Dao Wenbing, then only 29 years old, resolutely sentenced him to death despite all pressure from acquaintances, superiors, and money. Although the verdict pleased society, Xiaoguo's family later lobbied to have the sentence gradually reduced to life imprisonment, then just 12 years. After release, he continued as a crime boss until 2019, when he was finally executed. The case that made Dao Wenbing nationally famous was Ma Jiajue in 2004. This 23-year-old student killed 4 roommates over a card game dispute, hid the bodies, and fled. When lawyers requested another psychiatric evaluation, Dao Wenbing rejected it, and within just 2 days pronounced the death sentence immediately. This success led to him being praised as a star judge, interviewed by CCTV and commended by the court. However, Dao Wenbing gradually became subjective, arbitrary, and abusive of power. Many lawyers described him with 2 words: domineering, often interrupting, creating difficulties, and treating himself like a prosecutor rather than a judge. Unaware of these shortcomings, in 2009, he was demoted from the intermediate court to the district level. After 5 to 6 years of networking, he was transferred back, but only to a cold position without real authority. Nearly 50 years old, while former colleagues had all been promoted, he remained stuck at the section chief level. Simultaneously with his career decline and dim future, Wenbing's marriage also encountered problems. The beautiful wife who had once decided to follow her husband out of love had, thanks to her outstanding talent and excellent work handling ability, become a senior executive at a foreign company. Meanwhile, the husband at home had lost his glory and was somewhat unemployed, making her feel they were no longer compatible as before. After Dao Wenbing committed his crime, a colleague revealed that for a long time, he and his wife had been living separate lives, meaning each had their own life. Although this rumor lacked clear evidence, the fact that after Dao Wenbing was transferred back to the intermediate court, his wife didn't accompany him but chose to live, separately showed their relationship was truly no longer happy. It was precisely when both family and career were in difficulty that Yang Ping, deputy chief of the technical department at the intermediate court, became the important medicine helping Wenbing regain confidence and masculine dignity. According to Wenbing's testimony, he met Yang Ping, 10 years younger than himself, at a department gathering. She was both beautiful and gentle, and more importantly, she was very familiar with the achievements Dao Wenbing had created when trying famous cases like Ma Jiejue and Sun Jiaoguo, which made him feel very respected. So the two began dating and gradually developed feelings for each other. Wenbing even divorced his wife because of Yang Ping. However, Dao Wenbing's idea was to obtain both love and career advancement, but he didn't expect that wanting to climb up through a shared mistress was completely an illusion. Although Yang Ping appeared gentle and understanding on the surface, the reality was completely different from what Dao Wenbing thought. She didn't admire him at all, but in her heart looked down on this useless old man. Wenbing considered himself important in Yang Ping's heart, but in her heart, he was just someone she used to satisfy her physical needs. On October 22, 2020, before Wenbing's murder case was officially concluded, Chen Chang, chief judge of the Yuxi Intermediate People's Court in Yunnan, who was responsible for trying this case, voluntarily surrendered and confessed to bribery and illegal gains of over 4 million yuan, $550,000. The case wasn't finished, but the judge went to prison first. This reversal truly shocked people. Media revealed that Kaier Company bribed Chen Chang, who was responsible for trying Wenbing's case. This company claimed to provide technology services, but mainly served Yunnan government agencies. Financial reports showed the main expense was marketing, with secret accounts spending from tens to hundreds of millions. General Manager Zheng Xiaofeng, after being arrested, provided a bribery list of over 100 officials. He admitted the secret to developing the company from 5,000 to 200 million in revenue was giving money to leaders to get projects. Chen Chang received 4 million, then signed a 60 million contract for this company. When discovered, Chen Chang voluntarily surrendered and additionally implicated Zhou Yingshu, the procuratorate-chief, who was also quickly arrested. Together with Wenbing awaiting trial and Zhao Ligong, these four formed a corruption network. This purge originated in 2014 when high-level Yunnan leaders consecutively fell. From high-level leaders to Chen Chang, they fell like dominoes. Wenbing was just a small link in this enormous network. Whether he killed Yang Ping or not, he could hardly escape prison. Due to major changes in Yunnan's public security, procuratorate, and court systems, Wenbing's trial was repeatedly postponed. It wasn't until January 2023 that the Yuxi Intermediate People's Court in Yunnan Province officially pronounced judgment. Dao Wenbing was found guilty of intentional homicide, illegal possession of weapons, bribery, and concealing and harboring illegal income. With multiple crimes combined, the court sentenced him to death with a 2-year reprieve. In June of the same year, the Yunnan Provincial Higher Court issued an appellate decision, officially upholding the original first instance verdict. The Dao Wenbing case is not just the personal tragedy of a fallen judge, but also a mirror reflecting the corruption of an entire system, from fair trials in the past to cold-blooded crimes later, from a respected judge to a despicable criminal. Dao Wenbing's life serves as a painful warning about how unchecked power can transform those who safeguard justice into destroyers of that very justice. What are your thoughts on this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for following along and see you in the next videos.